There's a particular kind of tiredness that doesn't come from doing too little. It comes from doing meaningful work, the kind you believe in, and noticing somewhere underneath that you can't actually stop. Not because anyone is forcing you, because stopping feels like a small betrayal of the people you're trying to help, the version of yourself you've built, the standard you've quietly agreed to meet for the rest of your life. You might call it commitment, you might call it purpose. But if you sit with it honestly, there's something else inside it. A faint, constant pressure that has nothing to do with the work and everything to do with who you'd have to be if you weren't doing it. This is the shape we're going to look at today. And John Stuart Mill may have been living exactly what you just recognized. Mill spent his life building one of the most careful arguments for human freedom ever written. He argued that each person should be allowed to think, speak, and become themselves without interference. He extended that argument to women, to workers, to anyone whose autonomy was being quietly absorbed by a system that pretended to know what was best for them. And he wrote all of this from inside a mind that had never been allowed to rest. His father had trained him from the age of 3 to be a kind of instrument. Greek by 3, Latin by 8, political economy by 12. Not cruelty exactly, something more disorienting than cruelty. A childhood in which every hour was justified by its contribution to a future intellect. By the time he was 20, Mill had a breakdown that he could only describe as the discovery that even if every reform he believed in came true tomorrow, he would feel nothing. The machinery was running. The person inside it had gone quiet. What he did next is the part you might recognize. He didn't dismantle the machinery, he refined it. He learned to include poetry, friendship, feeling, but he included them the way you include a variable in an equation. He became, in a sense, the first person to systematically optimize his own inner life in the name of liberating others. This is the pattern. And it doesn't require a Victorian father, it just requires somewhere early on having learned that you were valuable because of what you produced, what you understood, what you could carry that others couldn't. Once that lesson lands, freedom becomes something you fight for on behalf of other people, while quietly denying it to yourself. Here's how the loop builds. Early on, something taught you that being useful was safer than being known. Maybe it was praise that only came for achievement. Maybe it was a household where your feelings were inconvenient and your competence was relief. Whatever the source, you learned to organize yourself around output. Then, as you got older, you turned that organization towards something meaningful, a cause, a craft, a mission. And the meaning was real. That's the part that makes this so hard to see. The work matters. The people you're helping are really being helped. But underneath, the old arrangement is still running. You are still earning the right to exist by being useful. You've just upgraded the currency. Instead of grades, it's impact. Instead of approval, it's the sense that you're on the right side of something important. And because the cause is bigger than you, any personal need that interrupts it starts to feel small, indulgent, slightly embarrassing. This is where the self-imprisonment begins. You start treating your own consciousness the way the system you're fighting treats other people. You measure your hours, you audit your rest, you feel guilty for joy that doesn't translate into output. You apply the logic of optimization to the one place it was never supposed to go, the inside of your own life. And because you're intelligent, you build a beautiful explanation for it. You call it discipline. You call it caring. You call it knowing what's at stake. The framework you've built for understanding the world becomes a fortress around the parts of you that never got to be soft. You see this everywhere now. The therapist who can hold anyone's grief except her own, because her own would feel like self-indulgence in a world this full of pain. The activist whose internal voice judges her exactly the way the systems she opposes judge everyone else. The founder who writes about sustainable work and answers messages at midnight. The parent who has read every book on autonomy and quietly cannot let their child be ordinary. The person who teaches boundaries online and cannot, in their own life, locate where they end and the work begins. None of this is hypocrisy. That's the wrong word. And it's the word that keeps people from seeing it clearly. Hypocrisy implies you don't believe what you're saying. You do believe it. You believe it desperately. You just can't extend it to yourself, because extending it to yourself would mean trusting that you are worth something apart from what you produce. And that trust was never built. The work replaced it. Which is why exhaustion, in this pattern, feels almost reassuring. As long as you're tired in the right way for the right reasons, you don't have to face the question underneath. The question of whether you would still be lovable, still be real, still be allowed if you simply stopped. Mill spent his last decade softened by one relationship with Harriet Taylor, in which he was, for the first time, met rather than measured. He wrote later that almost everything good in his thinking came from that meeting. Not from the discipline, not from the system, from being seen as a person rather than a project. He never fully escaped the machinery, but he glimpsed late what it had cost him. You don't have to dismantle your work. You don't have to renounce the cause. What you might do, gently, is notice that the freedom you're fighting for on behalf of others is the same freedom you've been refusing yourself. That the standards you'd never apply to anyone you love are the ones you apply to yourself every morning before you've even opened your eyes. This is the pattern. You have lived it. The voice that measures you is not your conscience. It's an old arrangement you made before you had a choice. Seeing it doesn't end it, but seeing it is